When the Necron race gave up their organic bodies through the trickeries of the Catan, only the most powerful and influential members of the Necron nobility were given necrodermis bodies that were sophisticated enough to allow them to maintain their full sentience. The rest became dull-minded servants under the control of their masters. However, it wasn't until the Silent King left his people that all these lords, cryptecs, and other members of the royal court gained full access to their sentience. These lucky few now have the privilege of fulfilling their wildest ambitions inside immortal bodies, leading legions of undead robots, having access to technologies that are far superior than most within the Milky Way galaxy, and possessing literal fragments of star gods. This makes the characters of the Necron race some of the most strongest individuals in the entire galaxy. With that said, I want to welcome you guys back to another 40 Facts about the 40K universe. I am your host, Gershwan, and today we're going to be talking about different characters of the Necron race. If you're new to the channel, we post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you guys have suggestions or questions, please comment down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer it for you guys. If not in the comments, I'll create a video for you guys. And if you guys enjoy our content, subscribe, hit the like button, and we do have a Patreon link in the description if you guys want to support us. It's just $1 a day, or sorry, $1 a month. But with that said, let's get into the characters of the Necron race. Let's start with Nemosaur Takeron, the supreme military leader of the Kinesi dynasty, and part of the Pharaon Menkes the Unmortal's inner circle. Following the Great Awakening, Takeron realized that his Pharaon had lost much of his sanity during the Great Sleep. The monarch of the Kinesi dynasty was entertaining the belief that the Tomb World was being sieged by the Eldari. Forced to fight an imaginary war in accordance with the mad ravings of his Pharaon, Takeron secretly allied himself with the Pharaon's consort and began to plan for a forceful removal of Menkes the Unmortal. He delayed the Pharaon's plan for a mass suicide for as long as he could, and then finally he carried out his coup, prompting a civil war within the Kinesi dynasty on its crown world of Morsas. As the inner struggle raged between the Necron forces, the Blood Angel's chief librarian Mephiston was able to penetrate the heart of the capital city and unveiled the dynasty's most powerful artifact. He corrupted it and destroyed every single Necron on that planet, ending the entire dynasty. And then there's the Necron Lord Vogue, also known as the Fallen Lord. He rules over the tomb world of Drazak, the Bone Kingdom. His world is populated almost entirely by flayed ones. Vogue is somehow immune to the flare virus, and is thus the only Necron on the entire planet who has retained his senses. Eventually his world ran out of meat for his flayed one subjects. Vogue then announced the time of bounty. He launched a devastating raid against nearby worlds, intending to harvest gore and blood for his warriors. Other nearby Necron dynasties are fearful of the Fallen Lord's legions of flayed ones. They are actively trying to prevent the expansion of the Bone Kingdom into their realms. There are those Necron lords who have chosen to use Vogue's army as a mercenary force to weaken their enemies or as a cleanup crew, consuming the flesh of the living population and clearing out the planet to facilitate new tomb world construction. The history of the Necrons has been plagued with division since the beginning of the Necron race, and while the Silent King eventually unified the many Necron lords and their dynasties to fight the Old Ones and their warrior children during the War in Heaven, the Necron race is currently the furthest it's ever been from a united empire than ever before. But there is a Necron overlord with the ambition to rebuild a united Necron realm and assert Necron dominance in the galaxy once more. Anrakir, the Traveler, is the selfless, nomadic overlord that has embarked on a self-appointed quest to aid the many tomb worlds awakening from the Great Sleep. Unique amongst the overlords, Anrakir woke from stasis sleep with a fully functioning consciousness, while other Necron lords looked at the current state of the Necron Empire and took narrow-minded and selfish actions to hold on to the petty territories that weren't destroyed by the passing of time. Anrakir understood that dominance could not be achieved without cooperation, and so he abdicated all responsibilities to his own tomb world, Pyria, trusting his ancient domain to the nodal command, and took a small, undying army to rally his immortal brethren. While this plan may have been glorious, the galaxy has changed since Anrakir last walked in its worlds, and the maps of old no longer correspond with the reality of the present. Planets have been destroyed, isolated by warp storms, or even shifted through time and space. Even if planets still exist from where they were recorded, the stasis tombs beneath its surface might well be gone, destroyed by tectonic upheaval, meteor strikes, or other unforeseen disasters. Worst of all is when Anrakir arrives upon a sleeping tomb world to discover it's infested with lesser life forms. Anrikir has little desire to start war for its own sake. His forces are too meager for wanton hostility, but to arrive on a slumbering tomb world to discover its catacombs collapsed and its resources plundered is enough to drive him into a rage that he would take out on the invaders, be they a low technological human colony, a sprawling wall of orcs, a Tau expeditionary force, or a planet-choking industry of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Only one response is possible: swift and absolute war, fighting alongside the Tomb World's forces, if any remain, or battling to avenge them if not. Not all Tomb Worlds Anrikin arrives upon are in such dire throes. Some have gone entirely unnoticed by the younger races, but in a galaxy burgeoning with inquisitive life, such planets are few and far between. From each Tomb World awoken or freed from invaders, Anrikir requests a tithe of warriors and weaponry to be given over to his cause. If the supplication is refused, he seizes his prize through force instead. A newly awoken Tomb World is inevitably a confused and disordered place, and such acquisitions are easily engineered. This also explains Anrikir's polarizing reputation amongst the Tomb Worlds he has encountered. To many Necron nobles, he is considered the highest avatar of nobility, a warrior who has yielded all ties of personal rank and status for the benefit of his own people. To others, notably those who do not willingly contribute to his forces, Anrikir is the worst kind of masterless pirate, almost as severe a threat to a slumbering Tomb World as any of the galaxy's other perils. For his part, however, Anrikir would prefer to be supported willingly, yet need overrides all. His forces, worn down and ravaged by past campaigns, are always on the brink of complete collapse, and without reinforcement, his great cause could come to a swift end. On the battlefield, Anrikir is always seen accompanied by a cadre of Pharaon Eternals, the remnants of the vast immortal legion which he began his work. The ageless veterans are unswervingly loyal to his master and murderously effective in furthering his goals. Yet their strength pales beside that of Anrikir himself. The same force of will that enables Anrikir to maintain command over his forces can be refocused temporarily to deceive enemy targeting systems, granting him control of the foe's weaponry for a brief period of time. So it is that any foe who takes to the battlefield against Anrikir would be well served to pay equal attention to the guns of their own rear, in addition to those at the front. Like all Necrons, Anrikir's body is built from self-repairing living metal known as necrodermis. As befits one of his lofty rank, Anrikir's body is of superior craftsmanship and richly adorned, clearly announcing his status and allowing him to repair even the most grievous of wounds in a matter of moments. Anrikir also wields the War Scythe, the traditional weapon of Necron tier nobility and their bodyguards for eons. A War Scythe is an energy blade battle staff. The energy field that encompasses the War Scythes allows it to cleave through almost anything with ease. Heavy and ungainly, these weapons are only effective in the hands of an untiring Necron combatant. He also wields an intricate wrist-mounted energy weapon known as a Tachyon Arrow. When activated, it transmutes a sliver of inert metal into an unstoppable thunderbolt capable of piercing the heart of a mountain. Such a weapon has a near-infinite range and is able to penetrate almost any form of armor, including that of a Titan. The first recorded Imperial encounter of Anrikir the Traveler occurred late in the 41st millennium, when a battle between the Hive City gangs on the planet of Mordegar inadvertently awoke in a tomb world hidden in the Underhive. All contact with the planet was lost shortly thereafter. When the Cadian 207th made planetfall 6 months later, there was no trace of inhabitants, humans or otherwise. Before the Imperial Guard could leave Mordegar, the nomadic Necron warlord, Anrikir the Traveler, arrived. Assuming that the humans were responsible for the apparent destruction of the Tomb World, he launched an attack that almost left his own forces decimated and the Cadian 207th utterly eliminated. Decades later, Anrikir arrived on the embattled Lazar system and immediately joined his forces to those Necrons defending against the onslaught of the Silver Skull Astartes chapter. Necron victory was finally assured at the Battle of Dread Peak, when Anrikir's Pharaon Eternals spearheaded an assault on the Silver Skull's downed battle barge, Argent Hammer. Though the Space Marines battled hard against the veterans of Pyria, Their efforts were undone when Anrakir seized control over the battle barge's still functioning weapon batteries and turned their fury on the defenders. With their chapter master slain and their forces in disarray, the Silver Skulls were forced to withdraw the blockade of Lazar, though they took great care to ensure that the word of their defeat did not spread. His duty done, Anrakir took his ship and headed out into the galaxy once more. In what was possibly the first encounter between the Tau Empire and the Necrons, a dozen hive ships of High Fleet Gorgon assaulting the Tau colony of Kamais were destroyed as a fleet of Necron ships unexpectedly emerged from Kamais' dead moon. Once the Tyranids were destroyed, Anrakir landed upon the planet and was greeted with great celebration by the local Tau. Uncaring of this, Anrakir ordered the harvest of Kamais, where most, if not all, of the Tau populace were killed or captured. In what is known as the Karnak campaign, Anrakir arrived on the planet he believed to be the tomb world of Karnak, only to find it infested with Eldar Exodites. Realizing that the tomb, if it still remained, would be buried too deep for him to awaken before the Exodites could themselves summon aid, Anrakir asked the Necron lords and overlords of other tomb worlds for aid. Reinforcements arrived from Mandragora, Gidrim, Etricon, though the most unexpected of all was a contingent from Solemnus, led by Trazyn the Infinite himself. All this took time, and by the time the Nightside fleets deployed the invading forces, the armies of the Alatok Craftworld stood side by side with the Exodites. Guided by the prophecies of Farseer Eldrith Starbane and the strategies of Illic Nightsphere, the Eldar attempted to stall the Necron invasion with a series of hit-and-run attacks. Their aim was to sever the command structure by destroying Anrakir and his closest allies, but the Parian Lord managed to subvert the prophecies of the Farseer through the astromatic analysis of Orican the Diviner. Though Orican's divinations are by no means as focused as those of Starbane, they were sufficient enough to tangle the skins of fate and leave many details beyond the Farseer's reach. So when the Pathfinders arrived at what they thought was Anrakir's location, they found him long gone and squads of Deathmark waiting in ambush. After several inconclusive battles on Karnak's plains, Anrakir forced the Eldar to engage in a head-to-head confrontation by marching on the World Spirit Shrine. As the tireless Necron Legion advanced upon its walls, Doomsides dueled with Eldar fighters in the skies above. Deathmarks plied a deadly trade of ambush and counter-ambush with Alatok Pathfinders. All the while, flayed ones prowled on the flanks, pouncing on any Eldar foolish enough to show even a momentary sign of weakness. The sides were well matched, with the Necron's hardiness countered by the precise strikes of the Eldar. Victory finally fell to the Necrons when Karnak's tomb unexpectedly began to awaken, stirred from dormancy by the chaos above. With Necron reinforcements now starting to constantly trickle into the campaign, the Eldar had little choice but to abandon Karnak and its world spirit to their foes. Anrakir was happy in the campaign's aftermath, and gladly acceded when Trazyn requested the entire world spirit shrine as a spoil of war. For his part, Orican requested no trophy or payment for victory, and merely hoped that when the flush of victory faded, no one thinks to question the convenient coincidence of Karnak's awakening. Although aggressively protective of his people, Anrakir is no stranger to diplomacy in order to achieve his goals. When a tendril of Tyranid High Fleet Leviathan in the Cryptus system was on the verge of consuming everything in its path, Anrakir forged an uneasy alliance with the chapter master of the Blood Angel Space Marine chapter, Dante. The Necron overlord promised Dante he would help eliminate the High Fleet by waking the tomb world of Perdita and convincing its overlord, Zarathustra, to use his Catan shard to activate the tomb world's ancient power generator and detonate the twin suns of Cryptus and eradicate the High Fleet in that sector. Anrakir did this knowing that the explosion would destroy not only the Tyranids, but the majority of the Imperial forces in that area, showcasing how in the end, all that mattered was the destruction of all of the enemies of the Necrons. One of the most influential and powerful Necron overlords in the eastern fringe of the Ultima Segmentum was the Pharaon Amontech, the Crimson Scythe. Long before the Necrons entered their great sleep, Amontech led the Subdakar dynasty and was one of the most feared Necron warriors in the War in Heaven. He conquered world after world in what is currently the Jericho Reach. So powerful was this overlord that tales of his destructive powers are still told in the ancient legends of the Eldari. The mystic cycle singers make references to a crimson scythe capable of destroying planets with a single blow. This was in fact Amontech, who shattered the planet of Maldek into billions of chunks with the powers of his great war scythe. So potent were the powers wielded by Amontech that even at the side of the Catan, the Necron Lord created just as much destruction as these godlike parasites. It is even said that Amontech and his legions of Necron warriors completely exterminated the ancient warrior race known to the Old Ones as the Nuada. In his thirst for blood, Amontech and his legion pursued the Old Ones and their Eldar servants into the webway, with the intention of slaughtering the beings that the Eldari viewed as gods. And while the Overlord succeeded in murdering one of the Old Ones in front of the ancient Eldar, the glory of victory was stolen by Amontech's cousin, Scythe, of the Karnovak dynasty. Scythe and his forces were successful in engaging the ancient Eldar, defending the webway and protecting their masters, but this breach in martial protocol enraged the Crimson Scythe as he confronted his cousins after the battle. The Karnovak dynasty ignored the cries of anger from Amontech and continued to push forward in their hunt for the retreating Old Ones and their warrior races. This bitterness would not leave the mind of the Crimson Scythe, however, and when the Crimson King set in motion his plan for the Great Sleep, Amontech's anger was so great that it never truly allowed his essence to slumber during the 60 million years. His bitterness coalesced at the core of his being, and the existence of the once feared rival of the Eldari might have gone undiscovered were it not for the actions of the command program tasked with watching over the dynasty's crown world as it slumbered through the eons. As the program watched vigilantly over its silent charges, it detected a signal. Usually, the system ignored such things, for they were invariably the incoherent ramblings of lesser species screaming their existence into the void, ignorant of the doom they were calling down upon themselves. In this case, however, the signal was familiar and aimed specifically at the crown world. It was a message from another dynasty, and it bore the glyph seal of the Karnovak dynasty. As ancient engrams flared into being for the first time in eons, the program set about a limited awakening process, seeking to tap into the lowest orders of its master's consciousness in order to prepare him for what was to come. In the meantime, the program decrypted the message and discovered it to be a plea for aid from the Karnovak dynasty's ruling court. The rival house's domains were being ravaged by an alien race descended upon the galaxy from the depths of intergalactic space, and already countless of its holdings had fallen to the Tyranids. The Crimson Scythe's hated rivals were being besieged and beleaguered, and were willing to offer anything in return for deliverance from their plight. Logic paths blazed and stasis seals parted as the control program delivered the news to the lower mimetic orders of the slumbering Pharaon soulless consciousness. The result was unfortunately devastating. The instant the eon-long seals were broken, 60 million years of distilled bitterness for the senders of the message burst through layers upon layers of failsafe protocols, and the feedback surged unchecked through the entire system. Countless thousands of slumbering Necrons had their cortexes blasted by Amontech's rage, even though he was still partially unconscious. The last process the Crown World's control program enacted before its own logic gates were overwhelmed was to instigate a backup protocol. Even as it perished, one line of the monolithic code at a time, the program sealed off the Pharaon stasis crypt and selected a regent who would rule in his stead. As the empty tomb world resounded to the last of Amontech's rage, his newly appointed regent awoke to find himself alone and unexpectedly on the throne of an entire Necron dynasty. All that Amontech had once been was gone, consumed over the eons by his own hatred, even as the last residual of himself looked on helplessly. Perhaps had the Necrons not sold their soul to the Catan, something of him might have survived to fight back against the raging bitterness within, but it was not to be. Now the Crimson Scythe of old is no more, and that distilled essence of his resentment for his own cousin dynasty is all that remains of his consciousness. To the detriment of the Necrons of the entire dynasty, there is far more locked up inside the living metal cranium of the slumbering Pharaon than the Overlord Regent, Amontech, or most of his cryptex are aware. The Regent understands that hidden in the mind of the crippled Pharaon is the entire dynasty's command protocols, along with the blueprint of not only the tomb world of the Hallowed Sun, but an entire network of tomb worlds throughout the Jericho Reach. Unbeknownst to the Regent, however, his most trusted counselor, Oskon the Codifer, has caught a glimpse of something an order of magnitude greater even than the miracle of the stellar engineering that is the dynasty's magnificent crown world. At first, Oskon believed that the Pharaon had the flare virus, but after receiving the dark visions of the future, The Codifer realized that because the Crimson Scythe had slain one of the gods and laid waste to a vast tract of the webway, the Eldar would never rest until he was hunted down. The Starslayer knew that the Eldar, or their heirs, would stand eternal vigil over any region they believed might harbor his secret resting place, so he set in motion certain contingencies to ensure that when he awoke, the Eldar would be overwhelmed, and attention to any other watchers would be drawn away from the Hollow Sun long enough for all of his serried legions to fully awaken. A silver tide would consume the Jericho Reach, and no Eldar, Tau, or an Imperial alliance could fend off the fury of the Necrons. Others believe that Amontech is one of the few Pharaons that knew exactly what the Silent King had intended for the Necrons when they fully awoke. It was his belief, and the belief of all Pharaons, that the Necrons should rule over the galaxy, and just in case the warrior races of the Old Ones were still around, the galaxy-shattering powers of the Necron dynasties would awaken, and a unified protocol would crush all life from the galaxy. Regardless of what is truly hidden in the mind of Amontech, the Ordo Xenos is paying close attention to the existence of this dormant threat. The Death Watch has found a chapter in the Forbidden Tome that is the derelict lexicon that claims that a crippled king will rise just as he has risen on several occasions throughout the ages, released by the hand of some unknown secret ally within his household. While some Imperial savants believe this to be a demon prince of chaos, more intelligent minds understand that it is the Crimson Scythe that has arisen from his tomb and will cause tremendous havoc. The Imperium of Man has waged many wars against the undying legions of the Necrons, and as more and more tomb worlds awaken, their savagery is made ever more apparent. One Necron overlord that showcases how unrelentingly brutal these ancient warriors can be is Kudlak, the World Killer. Kudlak is a Nemosaur of the Maynarch dynasty, earning him the title of Mactlan, or the extinguisher of life amongst his people. The brutality of this overlord stretches back to the ancient galactic war known as the War in Heaven, when the Necrons battled the Old Ones and before the Necrons entered their great sleep. Kudlak was regarded as the cruelest and most brutal of all the Nemosaurs in his dynasty. He was the killer who took particular pleasure in the humiliation of enemy champions and generals in personal combat, be they lords of rival dynasties or the warriors and servants of the Old Ones. A warrior first and foremost, Kudlak cared little of the intrigues of the dynasty's royal court, openly disdaining his high office, caring only that he was afforded the respect and glory that his conquests were due. It was so that while the reins of political power were held by others within the Maynarch dynasty, the overall battlefield command of its legion was Kudlak's alone. But in truth, this insularity masked a darker secret, for since the final days of the destruction of the Catan, some terrible force had haunted Kudlak. It has marked and tainted him, turned his triumphs into empty ashes, and threatened the mask of sanity he wore as both a general and a commander. Over time, the cloying, hungering shadow that hung about him darkened, and began to impress itself even on the soulless machine minds of the Necrons around him, making him a pariah even to his own kind. If the ancient legends are to be believed, it was by the hand of this Nemosaur that the Catan known as Landugor the Flayer was betrayed to its demise. Although the Maynarch dynasty has long scorned and refuted this claim of betrayal, regardless, some strange, nightmarish taint or even a curse hangs around Kudlak and his kin. Those unfortunate enough to draw close can feel a terrible malignance and a splinter of madness radiating from the Nemosaur's machine body, which claws at their minds and threatens to overwhelm them with insanity. When Kudlak finally awoke from the great sleep, he was both more and less what he had been. His eye lenses now blazed with an unhallowed cold light, a gaze that even other fellow Necron lords could not easily meet. In battle he is a terrifying figure, whose gliding android shell is blackened as if by fire and bedecked with skulls and bones of his victims. Sempiternal weave coats his necrodermis body. This ancient technology threads the exoskeleton with filaments of phased-hardened adamantium, making the Nemosaur's body as strong as Space Marine Terminator armor. The Nemosaur carries his dynasty's Obsidax, a specially crafted midnight black hyperblade that vibrates across dimensional states and can slice through a warrior much like an Imperial's power weapon. This once proud and glory-hungry general has now become a nightmarish and near-silent monster, the eroded engrams of his mind driven only by a burning desire to destroy the living and re-establish the rightful supremacy of his dynasty. Once Kudlak was able to fully awaken his warriors, he began his invasion. He led the Maynarch dynasty into the Imperial Orpheus sector on the edge of the Segmentum Tempestus. The attack was preceded by a communication blackout, which left the Orpheus sector cut in two. The Necrons advanced in two distinct lines of battle, one invading the sector from the outer darkness, with the second entering the sector from the galactic south and the territories of the former Lyax sector. Unable to call for help, the entire eastern half of the Orpheus sector succumbed quickly, with only the Space Marines of the Angels Revenant chapter putting up a true fight, but even their sacrifice was not enough to stop the Xeno advance. 100 solar days after the Necrons' offensive began, the silence was broken, and a tide of astropathic warnings and distress signals reached the Orpheus sector's capital world of Amara Prime. Only now realizing that it had come under attack, the Imperium mobilized its vast armies, but it could not prevent the Drusian subsector from being overrun. To the Imperium's surprise, Kudlak stopped his advance after 100 solar days. As tradition deemed it, their enemies would be given 2 cycles of the ancient Necron tier moon to prepare themselves to meet their death. The Orpheus sector's Imperial Governor, Calibor Lan, used this time to turn his world, Amara Prime, into a fortress, stripping other worlds of their defenses and transferring them to Amara. Crusading forces and reinforcements allocated to purge the chaos-ridden Chimerium system were rerouted to Amara, including armies drawn from the Necromundan regiments and the fearsome Death Corps of Krieg of the Imperial Guard. Most importantly, perhaps, the entire Space Marine chapter of the Minotaurs, under the chapter master Asterion Moloch, joined the defenders of Amara. And yet this stronghold of Imperial might was laid low in a single solar day, when the Necrons almost entirely destroyed the powerful battle fleet defending the planet and landed their troops unopposed on their surface. Had it not been for the desperate counterattack of the Minotaur's chapter fleet, the stoic resistance of the Death Corps, total victory would have been achieved. Yet through great sacrifice and bloody determination, Moloch faced Kudlak on the bridge of his flagship, the Carrion-class tomb ship, Dead Hand. The Minotaur's chapter master and his elite First Company veterans succeeded in wounding the Nemosaur, and Kudlak was able to tear through Moloch's Terminator bodyguards and was able to deal the finishing blow to the Contemptor pattern dreadnought known as the Ancient Geryon when Moloch himself intercepted and engaged him in personal combat. Though equally matched, the combat ended when the tomb ship was hit by a broadside of Imperial firepower, casting Moloch to fall out into the void and leaving the Necron fleet disengaged. Having not anticipated this level of stubbornness amongst their foes, the Necrons retreated with something akin to respect for these vermins which had settled upon their worlds. For the Imperium, however, the loss of the Battle of Amara proved so severe that the sector had to be abandoned and officially dissolved as a Sector Imperialis. The fighting, however, continued as the Undying Legions progressed to the Galactic West, and the Imperium tried to salvage what it could from the remains of the Orpheus sector. Since the devastation in the Orphean War, Kudlak has continued to lead the legions of the Monarch throughout the entire galaxy. Utilizing the ancient technology of the Dolmen Gates, the Nemosaur has spread destruction and conquest, making sure all intelligent races tremble at the mention of the Nemosaur Kudlak, the Godslayer, and the Cardinal Lord of the Monarch. And those were 40 facts on the characters, or some of the few characters of the Necron race. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We also have a standalone video for the Silent King, so check that out. I'll put a link up above. If you guys have suggestions for any other lords or cryptex or anything that you guys would like us to talk about, let me know what it is in the comment section below. I appreciate you guys listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This was Gershwin with One Mind Syndicate signing out.